Would have been in an email. Not this time. Yeah.
All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Chuck Angier,
Here.
Tim Duffer,
Here.
Brian Fox,
Here.
Kermit King,
Here.
Bobby Lovelace, Ben Meeks,
Here.
Ronald Scares, Keith Scruggs,
Here.
Bert Sellers.
Here. Thank you. Any agenda items to be added tonight? All right, if there are none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Go ahead and cast your vote. Who moved? Mr. Andrew. There you go. There we go. Motion is approved. Thank you. All right, has everyone had an opportunity to look through the minutes from the previous meeting? Now I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Have a motion?
Second.
Second. Would please cast your vote. Very good, thank you. Minutes are approved. Any presentations tonight?
No, sir, we have none.
Very good, moving right along. Hearing of the citizens. Under hearing of the citizens, each person addressing the board on the hearing of citizens shall be a resident, where'd it go, one away, or landowner of the county, or as registered agent of such resident or landowner. Each person shall step up, give his or her name, district, and an audible tone of voice for the record, unless further time is granted by the chairman, shall limit his or her address to 3 minutes. No person shall be permitted to address the board more than once during the hearing of the citizens. All remarks shall be addressed to the board as a body and not to any individual member thereof. Hearing of the citizens shall last for a maximum of 45 minutes. Any individual signed up to speak during said section who does not get the opportunity to do so because of the aforementioned time limit shall be given speaking priority at the next commission meeting. Absent chairman's approval, no person shall be able to speak who is not signed up.
We have one individual who's here, not necessarily as a citizen, but Mr. Warren would like to speak on behalf of the board tonight, Board of Supervisors.
Yes, sir. Chairman Warren, welcome, and feel free to take the time you need, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here for a couple of reasons this evening. The first is to tell you, as I've told you all before, I was really happy and excited to see the county move with establishing a fire commission. I thought it was very important, a fire and rescue commission, and you all have done a great job, and you recently achieved a task that was much needed. You set a matrix for us to evaluate agencies so every agency could be treated fair and equitable. I realize that there's probably some minor changes that you'll make as you go forward, but I think it's outstanding that you all were able to accomplish that and come to an agreement so that everybody's treated fairly and that everybody can benefit from the tax dollars on a fair basis that the county can afford to provide. I also want to thank every one of our volunteers. They do an outstanding job, and we appreciate each and every one of them. And this board has proven that, in my opinion, because if you go back and look, FY 2017, the county was providing $675,293 to fire and rescue agencies. This board recently approved a budget that is at $1,097,500. I felt compelled to share some information with you all for transparency that you all need to be aware of. There's been some false rhetoric put out that budgets were cut. And yes, there was some minor reductions, and I would like to share with you the reason for some of those. When you put the matrix into effect, if the call volume dropped or the services dropped, it could affect a slight negative change. And of the 5 agencies that were negatively impacted, Blair's Fire and Rescue, Ringo Fire and Rescue, Tunstall Fire and Rescue, Bachelor's Hall Fire and Rescue, Chatham Rescue Squad. However, in 2017, those 5 agencies collectively was getting $241,882. The 2021 budget gave them $359,500. If my calculator is correct, that's an increase of $117,618 over the 3 years. It's a 48.63% increase, and I'll say it again, increase for those agencies, not a decrease. So I say that, and then I talk about the other 6 that have been mentioned. Mount Cross, Dry Fork, Laurel Grove, and Keelan Fire Department. Yes, they saw a decline, but it was brought about because they eliminated their EMS service. The county cannot provide money to an agency for EMS services that don't provide EMS services. That's information you all need to be sure you're aware of, and the public needs to know that this commission and the Board of Supervisors are trying to spend tax dollars in a wise manner and provide them to the agencies on a fair and equitable basis. Cool Branch Fire Department and Cool Branch Rescue has had adjustments, but it's public information. There is studies and meetings and controversy and everything going on between the 2 municipalities because we were providing almost all of the funds and 60% of the services were going to Franklin County residents. We had to have an equitable position with Franklin County. It's not fair to the taxpayer of Pittsylvania County to provide the services to tax citizens in Franklin County. And we're just trying to make it equitable. And I thought it was very important for the true numbers to be provided not only to you all, which I'm sure the majority of you are already aware of, but to be provided to the citizens. And also, I did have an opportunity to meet with one of our chiefs that I have quite a bit of respect for. He runs a good organization, and I consider him a friend, and that's Mike Neal. Mike came to my office, and certainly he was concerned. He had from 2020 to 2021, about $4,415 decrease. We met, we talked about it. I told Mike, without a doubt, that had he had the need for Ringo or anyone else, that's why the county had set up an emergency fund for the public safety. So if he had that need, he could apply there, and if the commission agreed with the need, then sent it to the Board of Supervisors, this board has proven that they would support those endeavors. So the money would be made available. We continued to discuss it, and there were other parties present, and there was a citizen there that said, Mike, if Ringo needs $4,400 for a worthwhile project, and they don't get it from the emergency fund, I'll write you the check. So I don't know why we have a few, and it is a few, organizations, associations, or fire and rescue departments that continually want to push a narrative that they've been depleted in their funds or reduced in their funds, when that is not true if you look at the honest and overall picture of it. But if you look at this and you go back and trace the history, those groups that fall in the middle have been taken advantage of for years because of the system that was in place that didn't have any matrix. It was done on, well, we think this is a need, we think that's a need, and they were doing the best job they could because they didn't have all the facts. I'm not throwing off on the association, with all due respect, Dean Chief Fowler. I don't mean to do that at all. You all did a great service and a great work for the county. But they didn't have all the data that is needed in order to make a fair assessment. You all will have that access. We plan on having more information provided from public safety to you all concerning calls, volume of calls and all. So, I wanted to clear that up. And I'm reluctant to mention this, but we as elected Board of Supervisors member, our number one charge is the safety and welfare of our citizens. Unfortunately, when I watched the meeting from last month, I was extremely disappointed and concerned that we had one of our chiefs that openly said he didn't respond to 2 calls because they were frequent flyers. That's cherry picking your calls. That caused me concern because you all know better than I that time can save lives. And when you have to call a backup service and the county has to come from further away, that could cost lives. Citizens of Pittsylvania County. What if it was your family member? I'm not saying that people should be frequent flyers and abusing the services, but we have other agencies that address depression issues and other issues. Rather than in turning an eye and turning it over to the county or another agency to respond, we should be seeking some other kind of assistance for those folks, with all due respect, to try to eliminate the problem or fix the problem versus just saying we're not going to make those calls. And I was really disappointed because it is from what I've always considered and still considered one of our strongest and best chiefs. So this is not directed at him individually. It's directed to this board to please take a careful look as we try to set up an ethics standards, you all do. That's why it's important. We have to be sure that we have something in place that we all have accountability. If we don't respond to those calls, and it's out that we didn't because they were a frequent flyer, or because we're cherry picking calls, then you just increase the liability for that agency, and you increase the liability for the county, because we're providing all the insurance. The second thing that I would say about that is that's not who we want to be. And I'm not sure that if you go and look at any national or state code of ethics concerning EMS, that would be an acceptable practice. But again, everyone makes mistakes, and I hope we can correct it, and you all will pay attention to that going forward and not allow it to fester and grow that mentality or that attitude. I thank you very much for your time, and again, gentlemen, thank you all so much for what you're doing for the county. I know it's a hard job because you're getting pulled in a lot of different directions, but keep in mind too, when you don't respond to a call because you choose not to, and it falls back to the county, that increases the burden on the taxpayers of Pittsylvania County. So you should be looking at it that, honestly, that's additional revenue to your agency because the county had to cover it. We want to give the money to you so that you make the calls, not us. So again, thank you, Mr. Chairman and board members, for your time.
Thank you, Chairman Warren. We appreciate you. Fire Rescue Association report, Chief.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to defer my comments to item number 3 in the new business with code of ethics. That's the only thing I have.
Yes, sir. Thank you. County staff report. Director Slim.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Just a few brief things from me. First and foremost, I mentioned before we had started, or actually Caleb, our PIO, had started a recruitment and retention form on the internet. And I think I heard him say today we've gotten, since that time, about 15 inquiries, which Michael Lee, Deputy Director, goes through those and forwards those to the appropriate agency for follow-up. But we are getting responses from that, which we're really pleased with. And we're going to continue that, and we're going to continue a few other ideas that Caleb has on recruitment and retention. We just closed out the FY21 budget, and we had 2 agencies that would not or will not make the 70% mark for the extra money this year. Callan's Fire and Rescue, they're 50% of their EMS call coverage, and Mount Cross is at 66% call coverage. We do need to start the conversation of what we can do, like we did with Chatham Rescue Squad when they were dropping below, and we met with them and we were able to work out some stuff, and we saw a turnaround. And I think we probably need to start having that same conversation with these 2 agencies of what we can do to offer up some suggestions and help to see what we can do to get that turned around and fixed. I think we need to start having that conversation. Our county office, the public safety office, just so you know, we've moved. My office is no longer in the 911 center, and Mike and Casey and the fire marshals, and we've also hired our part-time training officer, Lee Barker. We're now down in the what was the election center there across from the armory. I'll be in and out of 911 obviously quite a bit, but our offices are down there now as well. If you need us, please stop by. We'd love to have you visit. I've offered at least to folks who represent our citizens to do ride-alongs if they want to come ride along for a day, kind of see what goes on. Mr. Angier did that the other day, and I think he took several places all over the county doing some stuff. So we still want to promote that. If anybody would like to come ride along, they can. And just lastly, on a personal note, Greatly appreciate many of y'all reached out, sent me text messages, or called me after my mother passed away back last month, and really meant a lot to me, and I really appreciated that a whole lot. So thank you, sir. That's all I have.
Thank you. Unfinished business, no items.
No items, no, sir.
All right, under new business, item number 1, apparatus CIP funding schedule. Director Slim.
Yes, sir. As you know, we've talked about this over the last few meetings, and it's been tabled a couple times. The committee, we discussed it among ourselves again. We got some feedback from some of the agencies. The one thing that they had asked was the ambulance, if doing the ambulance funding formula to reduce the minimum points you have to have before we'd replace, and we all agreed to reduce that from 45 to 40 points. And that's in your packet to do that. The rotation stays, that did not change, that stays as is. It does not require, again, a motion because it's coming from committee to pass. But that's the only bit, the big change is just after receiving feedback from agencies, we agreed to reduce that on the minimum points.
All right, so at this time, we have that coming from the committee. That does come with a motion and a second already attached. Any discussion on the point system and the apparatus, the CIP funding? Any of the commission members have any discussion on that?
Is the 40 points that you've come up with, is that realistic?
Oh, yes,
Now?
sir. Yes, sir. I ran some different scenarios, Mr. Sellers, on putting some different numbers in there, and it's very realistic. Yes, sir.
Okay, I know the 40, we all agreed was unrealistic, and it seems like 5 points less is not much of a cut. From what I heard last week, it was almost impossible to reach 45 points, and now you're giving them 40 points, and I just want to make sure that we're not handcuffing these guys when it comes to getting funding for.
It should, no, sir, I ran it different scenarios for the 45 points, and it was not difficult to reach, if you actually had an ambulance that needed replaced.
Did you get input from some of the other fire chiefs or some of the fire people coming up with that?
Some of the guys over here did, and I did too, but the guys on the committee had heard back, I believe, as far as reducing the 40 points, yes, sir.
Would some of
They
the
all
committee,
satisfied with
would
it?
some of the committee members like to speak to that maybe and address the point system reduction and how that's an equitable solution?
Well, we went back and we talked amongst ourselves and adjusted, and it's, the way we looked at it, from 45 to 40, it's obtainable. You know, it's very obtainable if if you have an ambulance that needs replaced. It's not a gimme, but it's obtainable, and it keeps everything kind of on an even, so, you know, everybody that needs an ambulance can apply, and that's the way we can kind of, I guess, differentiate who needs one that works. And some of the other members may have a better explanation than I got, but it is obtainable.
Mr. Schlemp, will this be a flexible number next year if people can't obtain it and we have trouble? Can we address it again?
Oh, yes, sir, I think we
in the
could do
next
that.
budget?
Yes, sir, I don't think anything's set in stone as far as that goes. If we,
Okay, as long as we're not locking into something that's
no,
going to
sir.
handicap.
I think if we get in this and we see it's becoming an issue, I think we back up and address it. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And I just want to add, I know it's not the exact replica of the RSFA system for the state, but we kind of mimicked the point system for the ambulances because they are so complex with hours and miles and stuff like that. I mean, everybody knows EMS runs a whole lot more calls. So we kind of mimicked the system based off of how the Rescue Squad Assistance Fund, which is, you know, the grant through the state, that's kind of how they score theirs based off a point system. Again, I know it's not identical, but it's similar to how they do it, and that kind of gave us our base to get started. And we were at 45, and when Chris actually ran the first initial 4 or 5 scenarios he put out, several of those, I would say, were just above reachable at 45, but at 40, I know it's only 5 points, but it actually put 2 or 3 of those scenarios that was before out of reach, now they're within reach to get a truck. So, because some of them would fall right around that, you know, 41 or wherever it was point stage, you wouldn't have 45, so you wouldn't get a truck. Now with 40 you would. So, I mean, I think it may not be perfect, and I agree with Mr. Sellers, we may have to come back in a year. And a lot of this stuff we may have to look at again in a year and adapt and change. That's how change works. update our policies and procedures, but I think it's definitely, it's more friendly. The association, several of the chiefs I know had reached out to me personally about bringing the points down, and some of them even said, you know, hey, we'd like to see it down to 40, 35 or 40. We met and we come up with 40, so that's just wanted to add that in there.
My question's answered, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other discussion on the motion?
So, we didn't change any of the criteria, right? We just
No,
lowered
sir.
the overall number.
Just the overall points.
Just the overall points, no. All right, if there's no further discussion on the motion, then we'll vote. All right, if you would cast your vote, please. All right. That passed. Very good. Thank you. All right, Director Flint, next item. Is that you?
It's, Mr. Scarce.
I'm sorry, Mr. Scarce. Go right ahead.
Yes, at the Board of Supervisors' June business meeting, the board decided the following items related to the county's volunteer fire and EMS agencies. One, after random drawing, Keeling Fire Department and Cowens Fire and Rescue Department were selected for an audit in compliance with county budget requirements. And two, we approved the volunteer agency funding allocations as recommended by the Fire and Rescue Commission. That's it, sir.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
question.
Yes, sir.
Am I correct, do I understand it correctly that with that matrix we put together, that Cool Branch will not receive that amount in that matrix? They're going to get a reduced amount because of the things that are going on out there?
From what I understand, we're giving the same amount of money as Franklin County is given of $12,000 each county.
Okay.
All right. Next item will be the Code of Ethics discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
can I ask Mr. Scarce a question?
Yes.
From the supervisor, on the budget, on the budget audit, is there any criteria, or is it, do you know when, or just?
Same information that you provide for your IRS agency status, or what do they call it? Your
990.
yeah, it's going to be the same information you provide for the IRS. Nothing peculiar, should not hurt.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's the way most of these departments in your audit their books every year anyway. I know we do,
Yeah.
and I've talked to several others that do. So, they audit, they go above and beyond, but do you have any date when this is gonna start, or just, they're gonna call you up, or?
I don't know if Mr. Hunt knows that answer.
I'll find out for you. I'll check into that.
Okay.
It should be as painless as possible. Like I said, they're just going to review the same information you give for the IRS tax-free status. So I don't expect them to go in there and try to dig up dirt or anything. They're just trying to make sure that, I know a lot of agencies in the past that had a hard time keeping up with that status. So we're just trying to ensure that every year that you guys are submitting the paperwork for your tax-free status and everything. So I would think it will be about as minimal as they can make it, so it's not taxing on you guys.
Yeah, well, I've said, most of them audit the own books anyway, but now, is it gonna be a rotation after this, or is it just, or this is it? I know this is kind of get your feet wet year, but is
Yeah.
it gonna be a rotation, or just?
I think they're going to keep randomly drawing, but I think if you just had an audit, you're probably going to be exempt for a few years until, you get back into the rotation thing. I think it was a 5-year split.
5 years, okay.
Chief?
Thank you.
Mr. Flint, am I correct in saying that in the event that they have had a formal audit done, they can submit that and the county will reimburse them for having that done?
I'm not 100% sure, but I think we did discuss that, and I put that down to ask. I'll find out.
Okay, I think that was in the original that we would, if we had one that was done in that current fiscal year, that,
I remember we did talk about that, Dean, and I've written that down, and asked that question.
okay, thank you.
Chris, do we know who's doing the audits? I mean, not that it really
That would
matters.
be a question for Kim. I think they've used the same people at the county.
Okay, but it's a third party, you know.
It's likely going to be Stephen K. from Harris Harvey and Neal.
Okay.
I've texted Kim about when they're going to start, so if she gets back to me, I'll let you know.
Thank you.
All right. Any further discussion on that? We'll go to Code of Ethics. We'll go to Director Slint first.
And I believe Chief Fowler's going to have some comments on
We'll
that as
start
well.
with Chief Fowler. Go ahead, sir.
The Code of Ethics has been before you off and on for the last couple months.
Yes.
Again, I went back and, based on some feedback I received, I went ahead and made some changes to that, feedback from chiefs. I thought very reasonable stuff that they'd asked for, and it was more or less about some of the reporting to the Public Safety Department for major issues. Major, someone maybe charged or convicted of a major crime, it was a volunteer, those type things. Other than that, this has been, I've made changes based on some of the comments I received from you guys as well, and it's still before you tonight, and I think the association has some comments and possibly with it.
Go ahead, Chief.
We discussed it at the last association meeting and went back and looked at the revisions, and it was unanimously supported by the Fire and Rescue Association to bring back before you all and request to move it forward.
Very good. Thank you, sir. So at this time, I will entertain a motion to adopt the Code of Ethics as written in the latest revision.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Scares, a second. Now,
Mr. Chair.
okay, so Tim Duff. Okay, so at this point, is there any discussion on that motion for the Code of Ethics? All right, hearing no discussion, if you would cast your ballot, please. Very good, motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the County Fire and EMS System Strategic Plan.
I'm going to speak from this podium,
Yes, sir.
if that's all right. One of the things that we have worked on off and on since got into the commission, and one of the things that the commission had initially set up as a goal as well, and it's been a goal of our suggestion of the fire and rescue studies we've had done, is the formulation of a strategic plan, kind of a roadmap to move us into the future. By no means is this a finished product. I want to review this tonight. I've added some more things to it. I want to get to a point where I'm getting some feedback from y'all. I'd really like to see if we can't get this adopted by fall. It's probably one of the most important things we're going to do in the early stages of the commission, I believe. I think from talking with board members, they'd like to see this as well. It'll help us with our future. It'll help us with financing our future as well, and set some direction for us. And like I say, I'd like to have feedback from y'all. If there's other things you'd like to see in here, suggestions we may add, things we may take out, data you may want. I've tried to, since I did the packet last week before you, I've added some more data to it. So that's why you got a new copy of it tonight. I added some more data. So, all right, that's working great. Okay, so as everybody knows, Pittsylvania County is the largest county in the state of Virginia. Population, and depending on where you go to look for that, is well over 60,000 people. A couple of things that we need to be aware of as we formulate our plan and think about our service. Based on census, under 5-year-olds, we have about 4.3% of our population, which is under the state average. But over 65-year-olds, we have 23%, which is well above the state average, as you can see. Now, why is that significant? It's significant for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're a high user of our EMS system. Some recent studies I looked at, over 65, you're twice as, you'll use the EMS system twice versus a younger person. And once you get over 85, you'll use it 3 times more than a younger person. But there's another side of that, and I was running out of room on my slide, but over 65 are also more susceptible to being injured or killed in a fire. So those are also the people we want to work toward when it comes to fire prevention. And we've had in this county several fire fatalities, as you know. Persons living in poverty, we're above the state average there with 15%. A recent study found that the people that live in or low income areas wait 10% longer for EMS, and that's a nationwide study. The other thing about people living in poverty is they too are more susceptible to fire and being injured by fire. And when you combine any of those, you have somebody that's over 65, somebody maybe with disability, somebody living in poverty, their chances of being injured or killed in a fire go way up. So those are things we need to consider as we move forward. And again, like I say, we are the largest county in the state of Virginia. And most of y'all know this, we have 23 agencies providing service to our county volunteers, and Pittsylvania County for the longest time has been serviced by volunteers for the most part in fire and EMS. Over the past 4 years, we've really worked, I think, to improve our service and improve the funding that the service gets. There's obviously, hearing Mr. Warren speak, there's a ton of attention to fire and rescue, which is great that we're getting that. I've worked in places where you have to beg for that. We're getting the attention we need to try to fix the problem. We've had studies. There were studies done prior to me, 2 studies actually, but the last one was 2015, and it recommended highly that we do a strategic plan, and then we obviously formulated the Fire and Rescue Commission in 2019. EMS has been one of the main concerns. That started when we lost our EMS service up in the northern end when Alta Vista closed, and we had to hire Region 1. Partway through their contract, they wound up going out of business. We were kind of hurting and bent over a barrel and had to get another service, which we did. But there's every time that happens, there's a big cost to that. During that time frame, I made sure that we would never be bent over a barrel like that again. And so we got an EMS license, got an OMD, and started working toward an EMS system if the county needed to do so. Just so happens we lost that contractor as well, and then a little over a year ago, we hired our own staff. One of the things, a couple things that have happened since that time, we've really turned EMS around, I think. We've seen vast improvements in the volunteer response rates and volunteer response times. Many of the volunteer agencies have gone out and hired their own staff, which is great. The question we have to start thinking about how sustainable is that for the long term, but that's worked out, and we've made several good improvements. We're seeing cardiac arrest saves, which is great. That's one of my favorite things to see go in the newsletter every week is when we get to say we saved somebody's life. They went home from the hospital. That's wonderful. One of the things over the last year that I've noticed, EMS call volumes are going up nationwide. We're no different. We're going to run about 1,400 more calls in this budget year right now, physical year, than we did in FY20. We're seeing that. We're averaging about 170 calls a week in EMS. So our call volume is going up. And you can see here, the top line is our, right now, current FY21 call volume. You can see where it's increased. We had a little bit of a dip when COVID first hit. Nobody wanted to go to the hospital. And then as that kind of smoothed out a little bit, we saw call volumes just going off the charts there for a while. You can see some major differences in some of the months between FY21 and FY20. And I don't think that's going to change. I don't think anybody's seeing that. I don't think the city's seeing that by any means. In most jurisdictions that I talk to, they're seeing their call volumes just continue to rise. Other concerns from the study of 2015, just overall decline in volunteerism. And that's not just fire and rescue. That's in anything nowadays. And it's not just in Pittsylvania County. It's a nationwide issue. So that's one of the things we're faced with. Lack of coordination of fire and rescue services. A study suggested that we go to a one-system approach with the agency still keeping their autonomy. We have improved this, I think. This is getting better. I think we're all getting on the same page more and more every day, and I think this is working well for us. Lack of one set of operating guidelines, which we've been slowly but surely fixing that. We did that again tonight with the Code of Ethics. Improving interdepartmental communications. We've worked to do that best we can with things like our newsletters, Facebook pages, and social media. Coordination of training. We need to offer more classes. That has improved, and I'm noticing we're getting, every time we turn around, we're finding another EMT class starting. That's great. And we've got people wanting to take the classes. That's even better. Last year when we had our fire class, it filled up. We were actually turning people away. So we definitely have people wanting to take the training, which is wonderful. And Mr. Smitherman has made a commitment. If we run out of training money, he'll find me more training money. He is very committed to making sure we can do all our classes right here. Again, funding. We'll talk about funding off and on throughout this whole process, but, especially the large ticket items, fire trucks, ambulances, last ambulances are $250,000 or better now. Defibrillators, $35,000 to $40,000. We've got a lot of agencies that are needing to replace air packs and air bottles coming up. So those are things we have to think about as we move forward. How do we fix those and help with those problems? And then we need a strategic plan, obviously. Just a reminder of the visions and missions that we set as a commission and for the commission. Just put that in there to remind you of that, and I think that should be some of our guiding principles as we move forward. So some of the goals to accomplish, to meet our mission and vision, and some of these we've already been going over, and I've added one down to the bottom there, but one, we want to develop a strategy to recruit, retain, educate, and motivate quality volunteers and staff while improving the utilization of human resources. We don't just have a problem recruiting volunteers, we sometimes have a recruiting problem for staff, and it's not just us, it's all around from talking with other fire chiefs. I bet you when Chief Fowler went and took his test, there's probably hundreds that wanted to be firemen. Now you're lucky if you get 10 some days. So, it's an issue that we're faced with. Developing strategies centered around standardization of operational procedures and equipment for fire and rescue is another goal. We want a goal of providing consistent county-wide fire and EMS services, responses within response standards. Somebody should get the same if they live in Tunstall, if they live in Hurt, if they live in Chatham. They should get reasonably the same service all around. And then lastly, we want to develop and implement strategies for countywide community risk reduction. Let's go and think about, I was talking to you about the elderly population. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, but how do we get in to help those people and reduce the hazards to them? There's a lot we can do there. So goal one, developing a strategy to recruit, retain, educate, motivate quality volunteers and staff while improving our utilization. We've set some objectives there, and I'll go down through the objectives specifically. Objective one is develop and implement a strategy for effective volunteer management. The number one reason volunteers leave volunteer agencies is because of poor leadership. When you have good leaders, just like, and it's not just even in a business. If you have a good leader in a business, people stay with that business. Same with volunteerism. When you have a bad leader, people leave that business. And we see that. I've seen that. I know all of y'all have seen that in volunteer agencies where you have good leadership and you have a lot of people wanting to be there, and you have bad leadership and everybody leaves. So how do we address that? Well, we've started creating chief and captain standards. We've already set that bar. We want to increase a management type style of training to our existing leadership. We need to start thinking about leaders for the future. Dean and I've talked about that. I know your agency's been looking at that. Who's going to take the place of some of these folks? So we need to start thinking about how do we develop our younger folks to be in leaders, and providing them the tools necessary. It's not just, I got the same problem in public safety. We're working toward one of those right now, that developing some leaders that we know on down the road will take our spots eventually. Develop job descriptions for volunteer positions, such as those chief and captains, so they know what's expected of them. And then we want to create a code of conduct, which we accomplished tonight. We want to develop and implement a marketing strategy to recruit volunteers. We've kind of started that, but we've got a long way to go. And Caleb honestly has some great ideas. He came in the door with some really good ideas on this, and we're going to continue to do that. We want to pursue a firefighter program in the school. We've been talking about that. COVID kind of hamstrung us there a little bit, but I think as schools get back to being normal, which I hope they do, and I think everybody does, we're going to work to try to get that firefighter program in the schools because we think that's a good place to recruit folks. We want to provide support to our existing high school EMT program. When I came here, I met with Jeff Reynolds. I don't think there was a lot of discussion with him before, and we've talked with him a couple times what we could do to help with that. I know Mike Neal gave me some people to go, some of his younger folks to go talk to him about volunteering. Nobody had ever talked to him about volunteering, the EMT, so we're going to start doing some stuff like continue to do that. And I think we ought to try to set a goal of 10% increase in active volunteers. That doesn't necessarily mean you go out and recruit anybody. We might have an agency that could do that and never recruit the first person because they've got half their membership that you never see, never run a call. I know everybody have got it, all y'all have it. So how do we get those people to re-engage and be active again and want to run calls? You know, maybe those are the folks we start with, trying to get those people rejuvenated and want to get back in there and run calls. We want to develop and implement a strategy to retain volunteers and employees while increasing and improving their utilization. We increased the training opportunities. We're doing that. We're heading in the right direction. We need to continue that. Provide staff to assist volunteers with the non-response type activities. I guarantee you, most of you guys have been a fire chief, spent 50+% of your time not on the fire ground, doing other things, or having somebody to do other things for you. You know, how do we help with those activities that have nothing to do with going to a fire, but are equally as important? Where can we step in and help with that? We want to seek out and look at new incentives for our volunteers. Throwing money at people isn't always the answer. So what else can we do there? We want to partner with Danville Lifesaving Crew, Danville Fire Department, and Danville Community College to initiate a local paramedic program. Right now, most of our folks have to drive to Martinsville or North Carolina or Lynchburg to get their paramedic if they want that. How do we get that program here? How do we get it close so we can do it here and take that burden off of them traveling? Because paramedics are becoming difficult to find, as everybody knows. And for our employees, we want to look at a career development program. We want to develop strategies centered around standardization of operational procedures. This is the goal too. And apparatus, equipment, and fire and rescue services. And I'll get into the specifics here on that as well. We want to develop a strategy centered around standardization of operational procedures and equipment for fire and rescue. The first objective there is we want to develop and implement countywide standard operating procedures and guidelines that all of our fire and rescue agencies and members will work under and function under. We've started that. We're going down that road with some of the SOPs and SOGs we've done. We still have a few more that we need to get in there initially, and then it'll be a work in progress as we go forward. I don't think we need to ever be a department that has countless SOGs, and there are those out there, and I don't think we need to be like that. But we do need to have some that we still need to add. We need to develop and implement apparatus standards, which we've started that. We worked with the association to do that on apparatus. I think we might need to back up and add one or two more pieces after talking to a couple of folks, and some of the chiefs have asked me some questions. And there might be a couple of things we want to add to those standards, or different apparatus, I guess I should say. But now we need to carry that on to other equipment, turnout gear, SCBAs, maybe our major medical equipment like defibrillators. You know, those are things we need to start looking at, getting a true standard for all those things. And then we would competitively bid those apparatus and equipment contracts that everybody can purchase under. So we can stretch that dollar out a little more for each of these agencies. I think we could really do some good there. We want to implement some countywide training standards. I think we need to do that under this. Develop minimum requirements for EMS provider, entry firefighters, and line officers. I think we really need to concentrate on, obviously the state says to touch a patient, to treat a patient, you have to be an EMT minimum. But we really don't have some of that standard for fire. And we need to think about that, because you put somebody on a fire that has no certification, I don't care how long they've been doing it, that chief really gets on the hot seat for that if that individual gets hurt. So we got to think about those things. We want to initiate, I believe we initiate a full-time training officer and identify a contract and training staff and a part-time training staff. That's something that's really simple to do. And we're kind of starting down that road, trying to identify who teaches what and starting to use that cache of instructors. But we don't want to burn them out. Again, we're going to have to figure out who's going to take their place. How do we get more instructors on some of these things? We want to continue with our countywide fire academy. We started that last year. I was really excited. We had a tremendous response, and then COVID hit. So, we'll do that again this year, and we want to continue to take that further and further to more steps. But that was, it was nice to see that many people interested in that. We want to continue that. I think we could have run 2 of those last year, to be honest with you, and they'd have been full. I really believe that. And again, we want to look for opportunities with Danville Lifesaving Crew and Danville Fire Department for training. And we've done that somewhat. We've started doing some of that. We've jumped in with Danville Lifesaving Crew on their CE weekend. That's been very, very well received. I think we could do some of that. We've done a little bit of that with Danville Fire. We're going to continue to do that. But I think between the 3 groups of us, we could really start making some headway. And we could do some great things down here. So here's where we're going to start thinking about some input. And we can look at various standards, but we need to get to a point where we have some kind of consistency in our responses, in our response standards. Now, I'm not talking, when I talk response, I probably should say reaction time. You can't help somebody moves 15 miles from your station, and it's going to take you 18 minutes to drive there, no matter what. Those are things we can't fix. But we can start thinking about what we can do about improving our out-the-door time, which has gotten better. But how do we get it even better? And we need to get there. So with that, we need to develop and implement response time standards for EMS calls. 90% of the time in a fire of X number of minutes, 80% of the time within X number of miles of county-identified population centers. And I'll explain that a little better in a minute. And X number of minutes within, or 75% of the time when we go outside those population centers. When I talk about population centers, I talk about the larger places, Chatham, Gretna, Hurt, Blair's, Ringo, those places that we've kind of identified as communities. But, can we get out to the eastern end of the county like that? That's, we have to think about those things. So what's going to be, a good response rate and a good response time for those things? We need to, again, analyze our call volumes, which we're working to do more and more every day, trying to figure out where our peak times are. I've actually had some of y'all, I know Collins came to me and asked for some data before, when their call volume, when was their peak time, so they know when to have people there. So I think those are things we can work toward. And then we need to assist agencies with incentives to staff their stations during those peak times. How do we get people, the way you save lives is you're there at the station. That's how you do it. But how do we incentivize that so people will do that more often? We need to develop and look into a tiered EMS response system that provides that advanced life support is available 90% of the time when it's needed. It's not needed on every call. They ran one a few minutes ago. I heard before I came in here, and I know ALS wasn't going to be needed on that. But we've had them the day where ALS was needed. And we're, how do we get that ALS there 90% of the time? So we already use priority dispatch. So we have a way to categorize that. We're doing that a little bit. We started that with the cardiac arrest calls and some of the other more serious calls. But there's still a segment that we need to capture that we can get ALS out and get it out quicker and get it out to the right place. One of the things I believe we need to do there is we continue to analyze that call data and we look at adding some QRVs. And that way we're not technically either replacing any of the volunteer stations or ambulances, but we're supporting them with ALS because it is very difficult to expect the volunteers to provide the ALS in this day and age. It's very difficult. We also, this is a very long-term objective, but I've been talking with Mr. Smitherman about this more and more. We ought to look at contracting with an outside firm to look at the long-range call data And are fire stations and rescue stations in the right place? Have we put them where they need to be? And that is a very long-term fix, but one we need to look at, because we do have agencies that are going to need to improve stations or build bigger stations in the long run. And are we in the right places? I've had conversations with a couple agencies that I know would like to have a better facility and need a better facility, and I think it's reasonable, but before back in the day when I was a volunteer, somebody donated you a piece of property, that's where you built your building, that's all, that's what you had. So we have to think about in the long run, how do we put those stations in the right place? Lastly, we want to develop, and I think this really needs to be done, develop and implement strategies for community risk reduction countywide. I think this is probably going to be one of the most important things we do, because this is where we start preventing things. And in this county, we've got to start doing that. We want to initiate an aggressive smoke detector program. We'll work with the Red Cross to do that. A couple things I believe we need to set up is a better reporting system for people who may need smoke detectors, and a tracking system to fulfill, making sure we're fulfilling those. I worked in a jurisdiction, we actually had a smoke detector hotline where people would call and we'd send it out to the engine company and they'd get out there and put a smoke detector up, which is great because while they're in there, they also see fire hazards somebody has. So you can talk to them about those things, do some public education. The Red Cross will work with us on that. I don't know if y'all know it or not, but the Red Cross spends more of their budget money on fire victims than they do disaster victims. So they have a very vested interest in seeing this type thing. So they're a very willing partner. I think maybe in the fall we look at some, and we can use some census data for this. We can go back to where I was telling you about the folks that are over 65. We can concentrate those neighborhoods, or people where we have people living in poverty. We can concentrate those neighborhoods and maybe start doing some smoke detector blitzes out on a Saturday where we go door to door getting smoke detectors up. I did that in the jurisdiction, and believe it or not, it's one of the best things we did. And the engine company guys loved it. I mean, to the point they were competing with each other to see who could put the most up. So those are some things we need to do. Our fire marshals will start with some, we'll be tasking them in the future with developing a program to track this stuff and making sure we're on point with the smoke detector program. I think we need to look into the benefits of the community paramedicine program. Danville is doing that now, and it's proven itself. Been talking with them, with Life Saving Crew, about potentially piloting that program in our county, just to specific areas where we have our most frequent users, to see if it works for us. I believe it will, and for those of you who don't know, that's kind of a step between, I guess, home health care and EMS is the way to put it, where that paramedic goes out and makes sure those folks are taking their medicine. The people call us all the time. Do they have trip hazards in their house? Is there things we can do to help them to where they're not calling us all the time? Hospitals have a vested interest in this, because the more they see a patient in the ER, they get gigged for that. So they have a vested interest in this. But I think we could do a pilot program and look at this in the future, and if it works, then we could pursue some grant monies to probably fund this program. And I think it would really, really work. And we do have areas of the county that I see probably more frequent users than I do others. So I really believe this is something we need to pursue and look into. We need to work with our community stakeholders to conduct safety campaigns geared toward the elderly and the at-risk population. Recently, Daniel, we upgraded our emergency alert system. And we learned when we did that, we had a certain population that called. They had no way to sign up. So they called, left messages. Well, Daniel just started calling someone back, and we started realizing a huge chunk of them they had nobody here in the county. They were elderly, they were alone, nobody to check on them. They're an at-risk population, and he spent probably 20 and 30 minutes on the phone with some of them because they wanted to talk to somebody. But one of the things we think is we can get out to these folks and maybe start seeing them quarterly, just to check on them, making sure that, number one, that they're okay. Those type people also suffer from depression and other potential mental illnesses, and we can get there and help those folks. And I think it's a great community outreach for us. So we're going to start doing some of that, and I think our volunteers would equally probably want to join in some of those efforts. I think it's worthwhile to do. That is something I've got somebody probably here in the next month going to be setting that program up to get started. But we really want to get some buy-in too from our volunteers to do that, not just our staff. But I think it's a great way to get out there. We're also going to be talking with the sheriff about some youth outreach. They've asked us to join in on a couple times with. Again, COVID kind of stopped some stuff, but we're getting to a point we can get back out there. And I think community outreach is a huge plus for all of us in here. Anything that we can prevent as far as illness and injury and trauma and fire is a big plus for us in the long run. So I believe that is it. So I'll take some comments if you have them. If you want to start giving me some feedback, I'd really like to hear it. I'll do, if you think anything we need to add, take away, put in, I'm all ears.
I've got a comment. You
Yes, sir.
talked about hiring an outside agency to discuss where the location of these fire departments are. That's something you don't need to pay an outside agency for, and you don't need to pursue. You're not going to go to any fire department in this county and tell them they're in the wrong place. And you're not going to pay for them to move their station. So I think you need to take that off the table.
I'm talking about the county paying for that.
The
Move
county
it.
don't need to spend money. Well, I know where Ringo Fire Department needs to be. Dean Fallon knows where Blair's Fire Department needs to be. Ben Meeks knows where his fire department needs to be. Volunteers put these fire departments in these communities, Mr. Slim, and you need to let that alone. I really think so. I think to hire somebody to tell us where our fire department needs to be, we're serving our communities, and I feel like that is one thing that you don't need to be spending time. You've got a lot of other fish to fry and not relocating fire departments.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but that would be a very long-term goal too. It wouldn't be something, I'm talking
I
long-term.
think it needs to be no goal. I
Okay.
think take that off the table. I think that you have, that struck a nerve with me. We spent a lot of time putting Ringo Fire Department in a community where we thought it would serve our community the best. And I know every agency here, every fire department here has done the same thing. So let's move on from that. That's my comment on that. I don't know how everybody else feels about it.
I put that in there based on someone else's comment too, so.
Well, that's my comment.
Okay, I understand.
You've heard this side of it anyway. And I appreciate all you're doing. You had some good goals up here, and I appreciate everything you're doing. I don't mean to be negative, Ned,
Oh, no, I
about this.
understand.
That's just one thing that kind of struck a nerve with me.
Any other questions or comments for the director?
Can you elaborate a little bit on the community paramedic program, how that might work?
Yes, sir. It's, that's been around for a little bit. It's still somewhat of a new concept, but it's growing. Those folks in Danville, as an example, they have a list of people they see, I guess, on a weekly basis. And-
So I'll jump in if you want me
Go
to.
ahead.
Okay. So what we do in the city is we actually have a way to identify them based on how many times they call a 30-day period. So when they hit 2 or 3 calls in a 30-day period, they go on a watch list. And then what we do is we send the community paramedic team out, and they actually have to sign an agreement that they want this help. And what they look at is the reason they're calling, is it socially related? Is it economically related? Is it they can't get their medicines, they don't have the funding? Some people have to choose between heating their home and getting their medicine. So they try to work with other community stakeholders to meet those individual needs, to reduce those frequencies of calls into the system. We started this program, I don't know, probably a year and a half ago. I'm looking out in the audience because one of the other Danville guys out there. About a year and a half ago, and we have 300-400 people in the city now that are on this list. And so it's almost impossible to manage that without adding a lot of head count. And we're just the city of Danville. The county has 1.5 times the amount of citizens. You saw the poverty level, so that's really going to play a big issue into that. But I do know that the city and the county have been talking about a joint partnership in that community paramedic program, because it will help reduce those call volumes if you can figure out what those needs are and connect the dots with the right community or public resources or other stakeholders that can meet those needs. It'll take them off the radar from calling 911, because a lot of them, we've had them even call to go to the hospital just to get a hot meal because they don't have any food. And the only reason we went out was to take them to the hospital to get a meal. And same applies here with some of the folks that call 2 and 3 times a day. You know, you call 911 once a year. My former boss, Tommy Pruitt, if he was here now, he would make this comment. You call 911 once a year, you're having a bad year. We've got people calling 3 or 4 times a day. And so same in the county. We have those redundant
Yeah, we do.
callers, and we just need to identify what their need is and connect them with the right resource to meet that need, and that takes them out of the 911 system and alleviates some of that call volume. So the responders don't get burnt out, and they're able to go to the true medical emergencies and true traumatic injuries and things, the fires, everything they need to, without going to those same houses over and over. And the one thing, too, we don't want to get complacent is, one of these days, that frequent flyer, if you will, is going to call, it's going to be a real medical emergency. And you know, there's other folks sitting in the room that have run in the city that understand that concept, that one day they're going to call, and they're really going to be in cardiac arrest, or they're really going to have a true medical emergency. So we don't want to have complacency either, that every time they call, it's, oh, it's that house again, here we go again. Because it very well may be the day they're actually having a real emergency, and they're really sick versus not sick. So that's part of the way that program works. So we're kind of excited to partner with the county on that, speaking from a city aspect, because we like to roll that out because it has been very advantageous for us in reducing our call volume.
And who are you sending out? Who's going out to see these folks? Is this volunteers or EMTs or a little bit of everything, or what?
We actually have 2 folks in Danville that are on the career staff that are both volunteers with the life-saving crew as well, but they're actually medic level providers that can go out, and they've actually gone through certain criteria training classes to get certifications to do this community paramedicine, where they can actually go out and they can help with that medication. And like Chris said, it's kind of that step between the hospital and home health. And they're that liaison in between that, because again, the hospitals, the more times you show up in a certain time period, not only do they not get money from the insurance, they actually get fined because they're not meeting your need, or you wouldn't be showing back up. So it actually reduces that on the hospital, the burden on the hospital. And I know a lot of the county agencies will see those texts, Gretna's on diversion, Danville's on diversion, we can't take any more patients.
That's right.
And it'll help alleviate that load too, to keep the volunteers able to go to that closest facility without, you know, if Gretna's on diversion and they leave Chatham and Danville's on diversion, Chief Fowler's folks may have to go all the way to Lynchburg. And that's going to take his unit out of service for a good, well over 2 hours. Yeah, well over 2 hours. Being the same way, if he can't go to Gretna ED, he's got to go to Lynchburg, that's a phenomenal turnaround. There's other calls that they may miss. So all of this helps to reduce that call volume, keep those units local, keep them in service to do the greater good for the more people.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And they do go through a different training too.
Yes. Yes.
It's a whole different training standard as well.
Yeah, because they're not actually providing emergency medicine. It's more long-term care, social, economical, figuring out where those needs are and meeting them or getting them met.
I'd just like to add, for the short term, I think that's going to be great to pursue in the future, but for the short term, if you have these frequent flyers, and this is for anybody knowledge, fire and rescue agencies, you can call and talk to Chris and Casey and them, and they do go kind of outreach to these people now. We've had a few situations recently that they've helped us out with. It's not a guarantee fix because they can't make people not call 911, and obviously if they have an emergency, we want them to call 911. But, you know, sometimes those frequent flyers are taxing on the system, whether it's paid or not, and so they can kind of go out and just educate them a little bit on what the departments are what they're up against, what they got to get, all the call volume, and the citizens that, you know, kind of, we have other people we may need to go help in a true emergency, and just kind of educate them, and that sometimes you will see an improvement. So that's, you can reach out to those guys, and they do a good job of that. A few things I've got that I want to, and I didn't mean to jump over everybody else, but I've got a couple things I jotted down while Chris was talking. One thing that I think needs to be part of this strategic plan, and this needs to be more short-term, and I don't know where it fits in, maybe with the recruitment and retention, but we need to have some sort of setup countywide mental health services for our fire and rescue responders. I know very recently we've had some very bad calls involving pediatrics and things like that, with where we have had career providers for the county and volunteers that have really struggled with those situations, and that's just the nature of the beast. But that's part of keeping our people involved with the, you know, recruiting, and then actually keeping them here and keeping them in sound mind. And I know it's happened at other volunteer stations. I don't know if any, you know, but we've had somebody commit suicide at our station, so it kind of, you know, it hits home with me we need to make sure we're taking care of our people that we do have. So somewhere in that strategic plan under recruitment and retention, we need to try to look for a long-term mental health system to help out with these guys, somebody that I can call and say, hey, we had a bad call. We have a chaplain service at Gretna that does great, but okay, my one chaplain, he can't service the entire county, so we need to build a group, and I don't know how we go about that, and Chris may have some good ideas there, and I've called Chris in the past. I've had one or two people struggling with things, and he's able to help out, but as far as a set in stone, this is kind of how the chain of events takes place when we have these bad calls. And I encourage these agencies to try to do those debriefs with your people and just ask, a lot of them are tough. Firemen are tough. They're not going to say I got something wrong with them, but try to get it out of them. That's the first thing I got. Second thing is, I know you've hired a training coordinator. We need to really, really push. You've got people that want to train. Okay, now we know the statistics. You start with 20 in the EMT class, you're going to finish with about 12. Okay, Gretna, we just finished our EMT class. I was one of the proctors. We started with 21 students. We had 12 pass. They got to still take their national written test, which is the beast, but they've passed the practical so far. But we have people that want to train, so we really need to push, and I would love to see every year, and I know this is difficult, but every year there needs to be a Firefighter 1 class on the north end and the south end of the county. And there needs to be an EMT class on the north end and the south end of the county, because it's difficult. And Chatham's a good location. It's central location, but it's difficult for people in Hurt and Gretna and those areas to drive all the way to Blair's or Tunstall. That's why I took my Firefighter 1, Firefighter 2, all my training down at Tunstall 11 years ago. And that was hard, driving every day, trying to work and everything else. So we need to really try, if we can, to put our money and our assets towards that training. And Gretna will be glad to host classes, if y'all want to put them there. I'm sure Hurt would help out anybody. So that's the second thing. Just really need to charge to make sure we're offering the training on both ends of the county. And I've said this before, my last thing is a county-wide training as a whole, and mass casualty type trainings, things like that. We really need to we don't really participate in any large-scale trainings. We got a structure fire right now. We've got 4 departments that's going. That's a lot of manpower and assets coming. Hopefully it is anyway. But we really need to be training as a whole county-wide system. Pick some Saturdays throughout the year, 1 or 2, to do a big, large-scale incident. If we had this going on or whatever, nursing home in Gretna's on fire and we got to evacuate 90-some residents. How are we going to handle that? I'm going to need the entire county up there. Are we really pre-planning for those things? My station's trying individually, but I can't handle hardly any of that without the rest of the county. So I think, and again, where that fits in with this, I'm not sure, but that's just kind of was coming off my head as we went through this. So that's my feedback.
I think those are good ideas, and we've tried to do a little bit of the north-south thing. I agree with you totally, because it is a huge county. It's hard for somebody to go from Hurt down to Ringo to go to class every week. I agree with you. One of the things I'd hope we could do in the future, and again, this takes a lot of coordination, but are live burns, where, we're sending 4 or 5 agencies to a burn building to do some live stuff every year, so we can work together a little more, and we can do it and really practice it and start doing it right. And I think those are things we can start doing. And 2, maybe agencies that normally don't work together, going and working together. Because, you see Hurt most of the time, and probably Climax and Renan and
Sure.
Chatham. But how often do you get to go down and work with Tunstall or Broswell? So those are things I think we need to start looking at doing too. I agree with you, yeah.
That's exactly right. And that's going to help improve. I hear some agencies say, well, we may not work as well with them. And I try to tell all the volunteers, our numbers are decreasing nationally. So if we're going to survive, we got to work together.
Exactly.
And so that's going to help improve, if we train together and work together. Sometimes you got to put that, you can't have 25 people in charge. Somebody's got to work. So we put that aside, and we get, we can help improve our responses, and once we get there, our operating. Not saying that any of the departments don't do good now, I'm just saying that helps us improve. So,
Right.
So one thing I'd like to comment on what Ben said first, the mental health service for the responders. I know pre-COVID, we hosted several critical incident stress management classes through Danville Pittsylvania County Community Services over on Harrison Street in Danville. The other thing I see, some of our law enforcement back in the room, glad to see y'all, we appreciate what you do. They also have SISM teams built into that, so that's another piece of the network we can draw off of is contact maybe the sheriff or some of them say, hey, we need some of your critical incident stress management folks to come talk to our people. Because sometimes, like being said, you may need an outside person who's not a firefighter
Yeah.
to come in and people will open up to where they don't want to let that guard down in front of somebody they know or somebody that does the same function they do. So that's just some of the resources we may be able to listen there and check it.
I think you're right. We have, right now, at least in my phone, I have 3 people I call when I get that phone call from Ben, and actually none of them are firemen. One's a state trooper, one's actually 2 of them are state troopers, one's a preacher. And they're a great resource, and they've never, in fact, the last time I called the trooper, he picked up and said, I'm on the way. He already knew why I was calling. He said, I'm already on the way. So, that's been a great resource. And Reverend Cromer, and I know Dean put me on him too. He's awesome. He is really, if you ever get a chance to go hear that man just speak, he's excellent to talk about that. So I agree with Ben. I'll put that in actually as an objective to itself. It needs to be. Totally agree with you.
Any other discussion? Yes, sir.
Mr. Slip, like I said, I would echo what Ben said. I think, the training and everything, it would, really help us, but I think we need to push this, like you said, this recruitment and retention, because we got to have the people in order to get to the training part.
I agree.
But I think we really need to move forward pretty quick with that part of it to, to build some of these departments up, and because that way, if we can get the people, and like I said, you prove you can provide the training, we make and keep them.
I totally agree with you. And that's why I also said I think the agencies need to start looking at the folks that are on their roster that you don't ever see. And how do we get those people to re-engage? And I've been there, believe me, I was a volunteer captain. And that was one of the first things I did, try to get people who had just dropped off the planet to re-engage. Because they're already trained, you already know them, they already know how to do everything. So, those are the ones I think we as internally, we challenge the agencies to go after while we still work on the external people getting them in the door. I think it's got to be I think I got hit with, both sides there. But I agree with you, yeah, that's why it's the number one goal.
Any further discussion? Thank you, sir.
I'll keep coming back to y'all, and I'll probably start putting this out, association, getting their input as well, and start putting it probably up on the website to get some feedback, because we're going to reach a point where we'll probably need to start finalizing it for long. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, next item on the agenda is matters from commissioners. I'll start on my far right, Mr. Sellers.
None.
Mr. Angier.
A couple things. For me, the ride-along was wonderful, and there's going to be some more. I learned a lot. It really helped. And what Caleb's doing with the recruitment, unless it's changed, Cool Branch snagged an RN as an EMT. She's a emergency room nurse. So there's a real big payoff right there. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Scares.
I just want to echo a few comments from what Mr. Warren said. I think as we take that 2015 fire rescue study and implement the changes, and the Fire and Rescue Commission's part of that in the way that we work together with the Fire and Rescue Association. I appreciate all the hard work that's going on. I think we're striving for excellence, and I've seen great strides since we started implementing this process. And I also want to make a commitment. The numbers he threw out that how the board has increased funding for fire and rescue, I want to make a commitment. We're going to continue to do that. I think it's important for our constituents in the county that they have the service they deserve, and I think we're working hard together to get to that point where we provide the excellence they deserve. And with that comes the requirement that we give you the funding for whether it's for training for apparatuses or whatever equipment you need, personal equipment. So I just want to make sure that you guys are aware that this current board is dedicated to doing that for fire and rescue. We're going to continue to support our first responders, and I hope the numbers prove that. I'm just not blowing smoke, that we have proven that in the past since 2017. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Meeks.
I just want to echo, I think the new recruitment and retention form online is great. We've got a new girl off of that, and she's worked out great. She's taken her EMT class already, so we appreciate that. And Caleb's doing a good job, and we need to continue to educate the public on fire and rescue and the needs. I think we just need to be careful what we post on our social media, everybody, including the county. Statistics are important, but some things don't need to be disclosed. You know, it's public knowledge. If they want to know, they can come ask, but I'll leave it at that.
Mr. Duffy.
First, I just want to thank the volunteers, all of them countywide. I know they put a lot of time and effort in. One thing I wanted to add with the critical stress debriefing teams and the CISM teams, we do have that availability in the county. But I also wanted to just remind Ms. Limp, don't forget your communicators. They're the ones that took the call. They were the first ones to answer it, and I know in Danville we've actually got communicators as part of that team. A lot of times I think we forget, you know, a lot of emphasis put on the EMS, the field providers, but the communicators they're the first ones that answered that call and had to hear a lot of stuff, and a lot of times they don't get closure. They don't know what happened, so let's not forget our communicators, and that's all I've got.
I agree with you. Just so you know, we include them every time. In fact, before Ben called, the time before that I'd called was just for my telecommunicators because of issues. So absolutely, yeah, we do include them because I've seen that on their faces when they take that call, been in there, and it's hard to watch them. So yeah, I agree with you totally on that.
Mr. King.
No, I'd like to say just to continue to thank all the volunteers for the job that they do, and a job well done.
Vice Chair.
So, a couple of things. Obviously, Mr. Lovelace is not with us. I actually spoke to him earlier today. He apologized for not being able to be here. Many of you know he's had some medical issues, I think, gone through 3 surgeries. He asked me to let you guys know that he hopes to be back with us next month, so continue praying for his healing. And secondly, I learned something last night that I was actually talking to one of the deputies in the county. Apparently, Sheriff Taylor has run a program where he's got a number of deputies that have gone through an EMT class. One of the guys called me last night at 10:30 to tell me he had just learned that he had passed that test, or the written test. And so congratulations to those guys that have done that. I thank Sheriff Taylor for doing that. I think that can be a tremendous asset to us in the county. But it's pretty rewarding when you see a big old bulky guy tear up because he's passed his test. That's a huge accomplishment for those guys, so kudos to them.
I just have a few things. One, the one team, one mission concept that the commission public safety's come out with it. The volunteers were rallied into that cause. The 1st of June, I saw that. We lost a provider the 1st of June that was a member of multiple agencies in the county as well as the city. And we stood at the graveside, and I don't, Chief Neal, I don't know how many agencies were represented. Virginia, North Carolina, the city of Danville, it was Person County, North Carolina. There was probably 8 or 10 different agencies that showed up under that one team, one mission goal, because when you lose one of your own, it's tough. So for everybody that rallied to that, got behind the family, the friends, thank you. That was awesome. That was an awesome show of support. Last Thursday, we got the opportunity to work with the county SOT team as well as PS2, Mr. Mike Lee there, on a water rescue call where we got called from Rockingham County to assist with the search for the missing tubers. While our search turned up negative results, it was again the one team, one mission concept, and I have to say kudos to the county SOT team. They did a great job. It was a privilege working with those guys and girls from that team. I mean, they did a fantastic job. We had a couple of boats from the city and with a couple of their boats. We paired off one boat from each department working with the other one. searched to the state line bridge and came back. So to the public safety folks over there, to the volunteers, I know we had, I think Blair's, the south end SOT team came out of Blair's, north team came out of Hurt. Great response. We had Riverbend involved, Cool Branch, I think, had a truck showed up. Multiple agencies represented in that to try to search for these missing tubers. So to everybody that showed up, fantastic job. Keep doing what you're doing. To all the other volunteers, to our guests tonight, good to see you. Keep doing what you're doing. We appreciate each and every one of you. And with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
See y'all next month.